Some people say communication makes or breaks a marriage, that one of the biggest fixes for marriage is better communication. But I see that a husband and wife can communicate until their ears are purple, but still remain unheard. We may communicate all day, but with different personalities, perspectives, presumptions, and prevarications, which is lying with good intention, as in to avoid conflict. We may run in circles, never getting anywhere, cycling over and over. And that's where this course will make the difference for you. What's really in the gap between stimulus and response? What's really going on with you that deteriorates a marriage? And what can you do to exchange a negative cycle with expressions of true love? If you are ready to make a change in your communication for the better in marriage, here we go. I have studied the top experts in marriage, learning methods to build a more vibrant relationship. But more importantly, I have applied my learning and skills to a marriage of 26 plus years, the 4 latest years happy. And I pass my learning and experiences in the trenches on to you. The topics of this course include your looping cycle, the 4 I's, 10 points of good communication, collaboration in communication, communication despite words, communication styles and tools, guilt and shame in communication. Love is spelled T-I-M-E. Fish and chips wrapping it all up story, and spiritual recapture guided meditation. You will have regular opportunities to practice what you are learning and build that communication muscle. Don't skimp. These exercises teach valuable skills and insights. Everyone can use good communication in marriage, but this course will be helpful for those who struggle with repetitive negative cycles of communication. This course is for you if you are willing and open to what you can do to improve communication in your marriage to change your looping cycle for love. So, jump in with the first exercise, identifying your looping cycle.
Have you ever thought about the negative cycles in marriage you engage in with your communication? It seems to loop around. He says, fill in the blank, which I take to mean, fill in the blank. Then I say, fill in the blank, which he takes to mean, fill in the blank. For example, he says, you never listen to me, which I take to mean, he doesn't appreciate my efforts and all I have going on that keeps me busy. Then I say, you're the one to talk, always watching sports, which he takes to mean, I'm a bad provider. And round we go, day after day, week after week, year after year of similar looping cycles of the same thing. They'll vary and morph and change depending on the circumstance, but they remain fairly similar, such that if you stop for a moment and make a simple diagram, you can see the perpetuation revolution. What you say loops around. I take it to mean loops around. What I say loops around. You take it to mean. Then it's back to the start. What you say loops around again. I take it to mean, and on and on. Done badly, which is often the case, the cycle gets meaner and bigger and more escalated out of proportion. Here's a new, rugged, damaging cycle of the previous cycle. He says, I try hard to provide for this family, which I take to mean, and you think I'm sitting here all day doing nothing? Then I say, if you managed your time better, you'd be able to help me, which frees me to take time to stop and listen to you, which he takes to mean, I think we're a mismatch. Why do we even keep trying? And then we act and react out of the fears these statements threaten. Not that I know this from personal experience or anything. Let me introduce you to a simple mathematical solution. It's the mathematical delta symbol that we place in the middle of our looping cycle. Do you remember what this triangle signifies? Reach back into 7th grade. Yes, change. The middle is where you change and transform the communication so that old patterns become history and new patterns become empathetic and energizing to one another. Now let's stop for a sec and see what might really be going on within the quietness of each spouse's thoughts with each of these loops. Consider this idea. What you say in this conversation cycle is always about you. For example, he says, "You are always gone." He means, "I miss you." She says, "You don't care about me." She means, "I want to be loved by you." He says, "You never listen to me." He means, "I want to know I matter to you." She says, "I didn't mean it that way." She means, "I want to know you love me." He says, "What do you want from me?" He means, "I don't know what to do." She says, "I can never do anything right for you." She means, "Please accept me." If you take what they say in a curious, compassionate, concerning way, understanding it's all about themselves, being candid, meaning honest, and not controlling what's not yours, how would things change in your communication in marriage? So here's an assignment to get you started. Fill out your looping cycle diagram in your marriage communication. Do it for as many things as you seem to have looping cycles. I'd wager that it's not really that many things you have to cycle when you boil it down. Then take a look at how you could change the way you interpret what they say in that moment's pause in the middle before you react. Then we'll move on to the 4 I's in good self-communication.
Communication with self. The 4 I's. Instinct, intellect, intuition, and inspiration. To begin, it's hard to separate the 4 I's since they meld into each other and exist simultaneously at times, so don't be too hung up on the separation of how I present the 4 I's. So to begin, the first I is instinct, or your gut. The part of your body, this is your digestion. Some people say there are transmitters to your gut, kind of like a second brain. So this is where we get the feeling of instinct, is in the gut. The second is intellect. This is thoughts in the mind, and the mind is residing in the brain area of the body. The third I is intuition, and we're going to say this area is the heart, or your conscience, or even the subconscious part of you. And fourth is inspiration. This is your spirit, your total spirit that encompasses your whole body. So we begin with instinct. In the book, The Gift of Fear by Gavin de Becker, he talks about a mother who can fight like a lion when her child is threatened, whether or not she previously thought she knew how to use her keys and her fists and her growls. This is an instinctual response by this woman. So what is instinct? Instinct is an innate physical reaction or behavior to stimuli, a hardwired tendency toward a particular behavior, a motor response initiated by the body totally controlled by an external stimulus. Instinct is neither learned nor developmental behavior. You don't even have time to think. Our depending on our instincts has decreased, I believe. For example, I was performing in a symphony concert the other night, and the way that we had positioned our chairs and everything with all of the orchestra in front and the choir behind, and I was sitting with the percussion, there were the loud parts of percussion right behind where I was sitting. And sometimes that was me that was hitting the percussion, but for now I was sitting down at a keyboard. And the first time the person right behind me crashed those crash cymbals together, I just about jumped out of the chair. That was an instinctual response that I heard that sound and jumped. But then I noticed that as our concert kept going, this was actually the dress rehearsal where I was figuring this out, that I didn't have to jump every time I heard that noise. And pretty soon the crash would happen and I wasn't even responding at all. But I remember thinking that I needed to push down that instinct to jump because I didn't want to look terribly ridiculous. So instinct is something that we do naturally, but I think that we can start to suppress it based upon what we don't want to show externally to the world. Think about how animals know when to seek a higher ground in a hurricane. But do we? Let me give you an example that I will use for all of the 4 I's about, let's say you are walking down a sidewalk, and unbeknownst to you, a large crack had just opened in the earth and there was a several foot wide gap in the sidewalk, and you will fall down and probably go inside that gap
if you don't do something. So the first reaction would be instinct. That is that you're walking along talking to your friend, and suddenly you stop and you stick out your hand and stop your friend, and you stop yourself so that you don't fall into that crack. And you think, I'm so glad I stopped before plummeting into that huge gap in the sidewalk. That was an instinctual response to stop at that gap in the sidewalk that you didn't know was going to be there. Now here's a little trauma and gut instinct side note. We are inborn with instincts for protection, but when we have lived too long with these defensive feelings, such as from trauma and PTSD, we see it physically, such as adrenal fatigue, emotionally, shutting down, spiritually, skewed beliefs, morally, less conscience, socially, anxiety, and mentally, with decreased functioning reserved for fight or flight, and so forth. Trauma can get in the way of our well-being on a whole level. So just take that note about that trauma in our life. The second I, intellect, a learned response. Intellect isn't innate or inborn. It is crafted and fashioned. But I believe we have always had intelligence or intellect, even before receiving an earthly body. As a mind is to a brain, the feelings of the heart, say love, is to the actual organ of the heart. You can't deny a specific feeling to the heart area when experiencing love, right? I like to call building the intellect as seeking to know what God already knows. Because isn't that true? I think it's funny that the men and women of this planet seek so arduously for answers through science, literature, history, math, philosophy, and so forth. On and on they spin, seeking for the wise eminence of those with enough certification and degrees, as their conclusions forever change. For example, in the early 1900s, we were encouraged to make sure we get both vitamins in our diet. Yet we as a society adhere to the present conclusions the authorities assert. Despite their forever changing theorizing, we morph happily along with. We blunder through, seeking to know what God already knows, when anything we may acquire intellectually is but a speck of his omniscient knowing. I support seeking to know what God already knows. I call myself a forever student. But how many of us rely on the intellect for so much of our knowing? How much do we rely on Google or social media to gain more knowledge? Intellect is an important part of making informed decisions, but have you ever been where I was, doing largely brain thinking as the primary mode of communication with myself and the world? Let's think about the gap in the sidewalk analogy with the intellect and the mind. You're walking along, and you have enough foresight to look and see, oh, I see there's a huge gap in the sidewalk. I'm going to stop. You are using your intelligence to see what is in front of you to know to stop so you don't plummet through that gap. The third I, intuition, inner knowing of the heart, the subconscious, what's really inside you. Let's compare instinct with intuition in order to know the difference. If instinct happens when you don't even have time to think, intuition is when you see or sense something beyond what is presented. Intuition is a cognitive process, whereas instinct is a behavioral process. Intuition is awareness outside of conscious searching, a subliminal processing of information that is too complex for rational thought. Let me give you an example of intuition in my life. So there's somebody in my life who gives me a lot of cookbooks, and I've gathered dozens of cookbooks throughout the years. And I finally got to a point where I decided I should probably get rid of these cookbooks. So as I have gone through my cookbooks, there was one particular cookbook that I came up with that looked like it would be so promising. And I marked some of the recipes, had little papers sticking out here and there, like I wanted to try this recipe and this recipe and this recipe. But no matter how intriguing it might be to look at those recipes, I just never did. So I thought, well, maybe it's time to get rid of this cookbook. But my gut instinct said, I may need this cookbook if there's no way to get recipes online in an emergency. This was a scarce protection mindset. So I had to calm that fear of, oh, I need this cookbook. And then my intellect steps in and says, it's always good to have more recipes. This cookbook has a ton. That's the logical thing to do. But then intuition kicks in as I'm just holding that cookbook looking at it. And intuition says, I don't want to ever use this cookbook, even in an emergency, or if I'm really grasping at what to cook on those nights I can't figure what to make. I really don't care about this cookbook, and I need to pass it along to someone who will. That's my intuition talking to me saying, nope, move it along, be done with it. How many times do we have these kind of experiences in life where our instinct wants to protect us, our intellect thinks it's telling us what is good, but our intuition knows what is truth for us? Let's say a word about intuition in trauma, and it can become stunted. And we all experience trauma to a degree. But in relational trauma, gaslighting affects our ability to know what is real for us. Gaslighting is when a spouse tells you that you're wrong, even if you might be right. So we are supposedly wrong and wrong again, even if we are right, which makes us not trust our intuition. We concentrate on survival when we are in trauma, not the fine-tuning of inner knowing, which happens through mental strength, not as viable in trauma. In trauma, we are more prone to be negative or emotionally dead, as that becomes the norm. And less emotion means less inner input. And often in trauma, you're doing enabling and people-pleasing, which stops us from our genuineness and our genius. So in trauma, if you have had experiences that are slowing your intuition, you can emphasize the importance of seeking physical and psychological safety, finding safe, positive, and stable relationships, developing emotional regulation skills, and enlisting in self-care for personal and professional stress. Side note, if both of you in a marriage need these safety measures, go to outside support until you are stable. And then what about the accuracy of your intuitive hits? I have struggled with knowing if something was my intuition or not in the past, because what might that bad feeling be coming from? Is it learned intellectual or emotional programming that isn't correct? Are you inaccurately reading your intuition, which is really just a repeated bad feeling from past experience? For example, I'm sensing my husband's annoyance. He must be mad at me. But is that really true? Question those hits. Look back and evaluate. Take a lesser charged topic and study it. Did I have an intuitive hit about not going on a vacation, or did my emotional state reject my going? What is the evidence here? But also, trust intuitive hits as often as possible once you get to know yourself enough to know that they are accurate. Learn what is truth about the hits, erroneous or not. You're going to figure out either way if they're right or not. If you're having them, there must be a reason, whether it be safety, learned emotions, denying what you actually want, what you should be doing, and then honor your inner knowing to hone it and to trust in it. Our depending on our intuition in general as a society has decreased, especially with all the information we now have. So make it a practice to check inside and see what inner wisdom says beyond Google. The website alightintuition.com says that listening to the intuitive yeses means following your positive hunches, listening to the surges of energy that come when you think of a new project, plan, or idea, not talking yourself out of the sudden knowing you sometimes get about something or someone, wearing the first outfit that catches your eye when you get ready for the day, celebrating all the little signs and inner knowing you get throughout your day. So let's think about the gap in the sidewalk analogy here with intuition or heart, your subconscious knowing. As you approach that gap in the sidewalk, there's something that tells me something has gone on here. I think I will proceed with caution. Oh, there's a huge gap in the sidewalk for which I'll stop for my safety. So there was a knowing based upon the feeling of things around. Though you couldn't see the gap yet, there it was, and you were able to not plummet into that gap. The fourth I, inspiration. I believe our physical bodies come with a mostly unseen spirit that responds readily to truth. As we said about instinct, the gut knowing in the sacral area is as to the stomach. With the intellect, the mind is as to the brain. With intuition, love and other emotion is as to the heart. And now with inspiration, the spirit is as to the whole body. Some call the truth our spirit responds to as coming from the universe or from God, a collective whole of what is light and truth. Could it be that done in the correct order, the spirit is the master of the gut, mind, and body? This goes for physical things as well, physical problems. If that were so, it would be in our best interest of communicating ourselves by tapping into universal truth and knowledge. So let's go straight to the gap in the sidewalk analogy. This is the fourth I, inspiration. So before you even step onto the sidewalk, you get the inspiration. You should take precaution because there will be a huge gap in the sidewalk today. This is the knowing of truth that is being spoken to your spirit. There was no other evidence. You had the spirit-to-spirit communication that something was going to be going on. And because of that, you were able to walk onto the sidewalk and know there's going to be a gap in the sidewalk. It seems really weird that there should be a gap in the sidewalk, but I got that information that there was going to be. And sure enough, you walk along and there's the big gap in the sidewalk and you avoid plummeting down into that gap. So I'd like to introduce you to the spiritual inspiration stool. There are 4 parts to receiving spiritual inspiration. Your spirit receiving truth. I like to say it's truth from God's spirit, as He is omniscient. 1. You must first have an open mind. Be willing to receive. 2. Then you must tap into your heart to access inner knowing. What is true for you? 3. You then recognize the fruits of the true thing, the results being favorable for what you hope for. And lastly, a feeling of peace or well-being, which I believe means you are in alignment with God's spirit of perfect knowing, His spirit to your spirit. You can feel peace in the gut, the mind, the heart, and overall. Here's a getting married inspiration example. Let's say a young woman has been dating a young man for a while, and she wants to decide if she should marry him. 1. Does her mind think this is a good option? Does she feel enlightened? Does it make sense? 2. Does her heart have emotion and conscience that this is in her best interest? 3. Will the result of their marriage bring goodness? And 4. As she prays to God, can she feel His spirit in this potential confirming this is a good choice? If so, then it's a go ahead. Patricia Holland says, often when I face difficulties, I need to turn off the phone, lock the door, kneel in earnest prayer, and then curl up in a chair and meditate, contemplate, search the scriptures, and cry out again and again in my heart, completely focusing my mind on the will and presence of God until I can see a clear picture of Him. I like to think of Him as loving outstretched arms. With such a loving image, I begin to feel my connection with Him and a confirmation of His love. Sometimes I may have to work at this for hours or for several days. So, I would like to invite you to do a little activity here. Think through a recent situation and decide if you acted on 1. Your gut or instinct. 2. Your intellect or your mind. 3. Your intuition or your heart. Or 4. Your inspiration of your spirit. And to what extent? How would you distribute your deciding on the thing on this pie chart? Yes, that's a lovely cherry pie there. Divide up how you might decide on the thing that you acted on into 4 categories of this pie chart and decide how you would delegate the parts of your deciding through the gut, mind, heart, and spirit. Good communication with yourself sets the stage for being able to communicate well outside yourself. In the next section, we'll delve into communication in marriage. 10 points of good communication. They say communication is key in a good marriage. Some even say it's the ultimate fix. But communication can simply mean a fair exchange of words, and it doesn't build long-term connection and knowing. A fine balance exists in effective communication in marriage between how you are true to yourself while being honest to you and your spouse, assert yourself to get needs met, maintain personal power, not be a pushover, not be offensive, not be contentious, not people please and engage in shoulding, all the while having empathy. I suggest 10 points for good communication. 1. Keep personal communication. 2. Remain honest with self and others. 3. Strengthen emotional maturity. 4. Own your stuff. 5. Maintain self-care. 6. Choose in the response gap. 7. See perspectives outside of you. 8. Collaborate. 9. Impart information despite words. 10. Seek for compassion, peace, love of self and others, and dignity. So let's go through those 10 points. First of all, keep personal communication and inspiration we talked about in the last section with the 4 I's. So remember, the instinct, the intellect, the intuition, and the inspiration. 2. Remain honest with self and others. Effective communication results when you are honest and defense-free in a way that imparts who you really are and what you really think and feel, which can be tricky. In my Love Zone Marriage 4 course on emotions, I spoke at length to what it means to be honest, even if we think we totally have been honest. We may even be deceiving ourselves in our deception. So here are some honesty considerations. What is our fear with naming to our spouse what we really think? Are we afraid of conflict, losing a good spirit, being loved less, having them think less of us? Do we really want them to lie to us about how we look in that dress? Or do we really want them to go out and about with those socks? Is lying a habit to save face or to stay friendly or to keep peace? How are we indirect or stretch the truth, exaggerate or minimize, thinking one thing and saying another? Do you want to save your pride and dignity and seem acceptable? What are you hiding? What don't you want to see in yourself? How do you not feel safe? Are you afraid of abandonment? You simply cannot have full intimacy and deception. I have found that as I've become open with some of my fears and tendencies, my husband has been very compassionate with me and me with him, and we do indeed grow closer. When I initially feared he would see the dirt under my nails and undermine me. In fact, I try to get it out right away, letting him know what's what. If he's curious why I'm acting some way and guessed wrong about it, I just get it out instead of letting it fester, letting him know what's going on inside me. Even embarrassingly, owning what's mine and not letting it instead hamper healthy communication between us. 3. Strengthen emotional maturity. Behind every hard emotion communicated is what Sue Johnson, relationship researcher, calls soft emotions. Like a hard-boiled egg, you have the hard outer shell that seems tough and hard to get through, but is all mushy on the inside. If communication isn't good, we're likely working through hard emotions instead of being open to the hurt we feel that we hide behind the hard. I talk in depth about emotional maturity in my Love Zone Marriage 4 course on emotions. But for now, realize that you may be communicating with your spouse at a lesser mature age than your physiological age. So the next time you communicate, take note. Are you acting like a crabby toddler? How about an aimless 10-year-old? A confused tweener? A rebellious 17-year-old? An overconfident 25-year-old? A tired-out 60-year-old? Or have you thrown it all out the window in your 90-year-old maturity? 4. Own your stuff. I love the topic of personal power because when I stopped thinking so much through a victim mentality, I realized what enormous power I have as the creator of my existing. It took some understanding enmeshment, enabling, overgiving, and codependency to learn to differentiate, reclaim sense of self, and moderate empathy, among a few things. When you own what is your stuff, from your background, your experiences, your genetics, your education, and so forth, you realize that the best communication starts with those things about yourself realized, not blaming or shaming your spouse for what they can't be held liable for. I speak more on this in my Love Zone Marriage 2 course on converting self. 5. Maintain self-care. To do this, we can give up unhealthy pride, people-pleasing and overgiving, control, identifying where you have power and giving up where you don't, and giving up perfectionism that isn't working for you. And what can you do for self-care? Visualize what you do want and then make it happen. Have a gratitude attitude. Exercise and engage in healthy eating habits. Find yourself through self-love and self-compassion, radical acceptance of self. Act through tenacity. Make sure you get your daily must-haves for empowerment and selffulness. Creator mindset. You can find out more about these points in my Love Zone Marriage 3 course. We all know what it feels like to be hangry, and then communication goes from bad to worse. If we clean up ourselves first, we go into communication with our spouse fresh, able to have a store from which to draw. Our cups are filled and ready to share, with us being more able and willing to love. 6. Choose in the response gap. Choosing in to the response gap means acknowledging your next words or actions before you respond. Stephen R. Covey says, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies our freedom and power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our happiness." I saw this meme on Facebook I think is so applicable to communication. Before you communicate however you are going to, think. T-H-I-N-K. T, is it true? H, is it helpful? I, is it inspiring? N, is it necessary? K, is it kind? Is it true? Well, it might be, but is it helpful? To them and you, loving your spouse as yourself, as the second great commandment tells us? Is it inspiring or builds the other person? What we concentrate on grows. Is it necessary? If not, maybe it's feeding ego in an unhealthy way. And if it isn't kind, why not? Have you not been giving yourself enough self-care, honesty, being emotionally mature, and owning your own stuff? If you're not able to think, T-H-I-N-K, what is off about you? 7. See perspectives outside of you. I remember learning on the Personality Hacker website about a particular part of my personality where I would do well to increase my ability to see new perspectives to increase personal developmental growth. By the way, I go into depth about personalities in marriage in Love Zone Marriage 6 course. I had always been a rule follower and didn't question those rules. When I started to dissect why someone might see something a different way, my whole vision changed. Look at this slide. This is a partial but correct view, and this on the right-hand side is a partial but correct view as well. When you look at the cylinder in the middle, this is reality, but from different views they look completely different, a square to a circle. I remember a time my husband told me he never listens to the radio when we're in the car. My jaw about hit the floor because he almost always listens to the radio. In fact, after being married about 10 years, I asked my husband why he turns on the radio when I start to sing. His response, "I thought you were singing because you want to listen to the radio." What? You thought you were doing me a favor shutting down my singing and turn the radio onto what you want to listen to? I had to switch my perspective to being, if it were his choice, he would listen to the radio more than he does, which is maybe only half the time according to me, and he thought he was helping me by turning on the radio to what he liked, assuming I liked what he likes too better than my singing. So I'd like to invite you at this point to increase your perspective by reading this poem as it instructs. I'll also include this in the resources section if you need to see it larger later. It's pretty eye-opening to realize what can be done when you have a different way of looking at something. I found this poem pretty ugly on medium.com. We'll continue my 10 points of good communication in the coming sections. Collaboration. Dinner time arrangements. Imagine with me for a moment how dinner times used to be for me. I'd work a good hour to get a meal almost ready, at which point I had to call neighbors' houses to get the kids home, then set the table, get the hot food to the table, bear the whining of the kids who don't like the meal, take everything back over to the sink, eventually clean the kitchen, then lay down to sleep, wondering what we'd have for tomorrow's dinner. For decades. Maybe you've been in this exact place like me. I eventually found myself in burnout. I don't care what we have for dinner. I don't care if the kids don't care what we're eating for dinner. Or even if the kids are there to eat at 6 p.m. I don't care if dishes scatter the counter when we go to sleep, and tomorrow's dinner is going to be as simple as possible. Baked potatoes that cook in the oven while I do what I want to for an hour. I knew this was a defeatist attitude, but what else could I do? I later found out I had extreme anemia and really didn't have the energy to do what I'd done for so long. For the next while, I tackled my anemia issue and approached my dear husband. I said, I can't do meals anymore. I will make sure there's food in the house, but our children, who are old enough to prepare themselves food, will have to feed themselves. And I'm sure you can find something to eat too. Imagine my delight when my husband replied, I have to work on the weekdays, but I can cook on the weekends. And then my children stepped forward to offer nights they would cook. It ended up I only cooked half the meals in a week, which allowed me to have the energy reserves and imagination to come up with more than baked potatoes for dinner. We were able to collaborate our meal times together, and no help was forthcoming until that moment I communicated I had meal prep burnout. Is that even a thing? And wow, can my husband cook? He takes time to zest a lemon, mince garlic, and use ingredients I didn't even know existed. A win-win for sure. And that's what collaboration is. Everyone is better off. I used to think marriage was all about compromise. Doesn't it seem like you hear that over and over again? Compromise, doing something for the other person even when you don't want to. In a loving relationship, it's better to bend than to break. Marriage is about seeing someone for what he is, being disappointed and deciding to stick around anyway. Compromise will always save your relationship. Every successful relationship has the 3 C's: communication, compromise, and commitment. But compromise can mean enduring discomfort, often unnecessarily, catering to your spouse's previous wounding, giving up part of the true you as you capitulate, giving up a degree of commitment to self-goals, living with resentment. And though boundaries are for and about you, there is a degree of crossover that happens with compromise. When I perceive that you yell at me, I will go somewhere else so that I can have peace. But there is an unwritten compromise that I have to find somewhere for me to reside in that peace. A friend's house, the car, wherever else. Compromise assumes one partner will give in. You don't need a close relationship to compromise, only an understanding of what the other person wants. What if we stopped giving up parts of ourself to compromise and stopped demanding that our partner owes us the same? I've done this, so now you've got to do that. A tit for a tat. Collaboration helps us assess and understand our partners and our own investment in the relationship. A collaborative couple works towards the relationship, investing in it and making sure it is successful and happy. It is working together toward a common goal. The truth is, once we begin to focus on developing our own personal power to create change, growth, and be the best kind of partner we can be, our relationship begins to change because of it. This is the paradox of a differentiated love, one in which you work on yourself to help grow and flourish both of you. I like what relationship presenter Monica Tanner says about collaboration. It's all really about knowing and then being able to then please both of you. We have be curious, to know, and also to not settle, or be known and get what you want, to find fulfillment for both. I used to walk into a shiny department store and wish that I could just have everything in there. When I pulled out of that scarcity mindset and told myself, you really could have everything in this store, I then thought, I don't actually want very much at all in this store. Why would I want to dust this or maintain that? I'll just be satisfied with exactly what truly sparks joy, which is only a few things that I'm willing to work toward keeping. I think the same can be true in marriage. There may not actually be that much that we care about once we have communicated our true selves and desires to our spouse, and decide how to make everything advantageous to both of us. You will both not need all you think you need when you focus on and share what is real and true for each person instead of always just trying to get the win, which changed the whole ballgame of communication. It looks something like this. Here we have the collaboration conjoining. We have, she gets her thing on the one side. I love my girls' getaways. And he gets his thing on the other side. You like to watch your sports. And in the middle, everything can be a match for us both. This is living in true collaboration, true to self. So I'd like to suggest something I call weighted collaboration through the story, Cups in the Cupboard. I remember a church lesson I heard from a 60-year-old woman who I considered in a successful marriage. She explained how she really liked her drinking cups stored in the cupboard on the left side of the sink because she could unload the dishes from the dishwasher straight into the cupboard above. It seemed more efficient. But her husband liked cups stored in the cupboard on the right side of the sink because he was right-handed and it was easier for him to grab the cups. A war could have raged about where to keep the cups, but this wise lady took a different approach that I'll never forget. She said to her husband, on a scale of 10, how much do you prefer the cups on the right side of the sink? She had decided in her mind that she cared to a level 4 out of 10. Let's stop right there for a sec. If the woman had said, I like the cups on the left-hand side, and since I'm the one doing all the work unloading the dishwasher, I insist we do it my way. To which her husband may have felt inclined to reply, you think you do all the work around here? Well, we don't always have to do things your way. I want to turn it having my way with the cups on the right side. Notice, they will be close to yelling now. Instead, after she asked his level of care out of 10, he replied, less defensively than he'd previously been, well, I guess a 7 out of 10. With aplomb, she stated, I care to a level 4, so we'll put the cups on the right side. Done. Each of them knew where they stood and honored it. But note, the man would have to be willing to sometimes take the 4 or the lower number and relinquish whatever it was he thought he wanted, at least some of the time. And if they both measured at 7 out of 7 or close to that, it may be good to communicate why and see if concerns could be readjusted. Maybe the man could take turns unloading the dishwasher. Or the woman could get what she cared about at a level 7 elsewhere, like getting some me time while he takes care of the house and home. And they both have an understanding that there is a level of care to gauge why and what they do. Or maybe once they are communicating about it, they find they both care to a level 2 and decide to instead worry about more important things. It was our 25th year anniversary, which was happening during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. Gone were the dreams of visiting New Zealand to celebrate our silver anniversary. What could we do instead? In the 4 days we had available within driving distance, my husband suggested a long drive a few states away, and I didn't really want to pack a lot of driving and a little doing into those 4 days. I had an idea, but I didn't know if he would go along with it. I timidly suggested, we could go to that little hot springs resort we pass all the time but never stop at. He actually liked the suggestion, and off we went. We had reservations at a theme-decorated inn, and once in our Romeo and Juliet suite with fireplace and jetted tub, asked for a tour of the other rooms. The delightful hostess treated us to a sneak peek at their premier room, the Phantom of the Opera suite. She led us down the winding staircase into the catacombs of the opera house, inn. She pointed out the canoe sitting in what glossy paint and low lights made look like shimmering water, the grand musical organ, and of course the opulent red velvet king-size bed. So fun. As we left our room the next morning, anticipating a wonderful breakfast, we were instead met with an icy chill in the hallway as employees scurried to and fro, ignoring us. Soon the hostess was upon us in a flurry, explaining, "I'm so sorry, we had a pipe burst in the basement, and we need to close the inn. There is sewage down in the Phantom of the Opera suite, as well as our food storage room. Here is a voucher for breakfast at the town diner." Apparently, the shimmering water the canoe sat in had become real water. With our doused dreams, we quickly packed and left for the diner. What will we do now? My husband made some quick phone calls and found us a small bungalow house we could rent the other nights, kitchen included. I conceded we wouldn't quite have the fun we thought we would, and I planned on using that blasted included kitchen to prepare our meals. Then I reached inside myself and intuitively asked, what would be best here? I remembered a dilapidated 100-year-old hotel we passed upon entering the town. It had certainly seen better days, with decorative gnomes peppering the lawn where people might otherwise be. Steam rose from the many outdoor murky rock hot tubs, and the "Welcome Here" sign looked anything but welcoming. But I'd had that intuitive hit, and again timidly asked my husband, what if we went to that super old hotel? I really don't want to think about cooking with that included kitchen. I have a regular house all the time, and I really don't want to go to that bungalow. He hesitantly agreed, with both of us surmising we could always leave and find another place, even sleeping in the car if we needed to. It ended up this place was absolutely delightful once you jumped in and immersed yourself in its uniqueness. With a scheduling conflict in the almost empty hotel, they offered us their nicest room at no extra cost. They may have had pity on hearing our story of sewage in the Phantom of the Opera suite basement. The dark nights in the outdoor hot pots became magical with small haphazard lights strung around as the mist added mystique to the odd statues placed around the pots. The old hotel was excitedly creepy, and the overflowing breakfast the next morning made me decidedly happy I wasn't cooking in that bungalow kitchen. In short, it was a miraculous, unforgettable 25th year anniversary. And all because I followed that intuitive hit with collaboration of us coming together with a winning outcome. So at this point, I'd like you to ponder two things considering collaboration. What do you think about this phrase? Marriage is about give and take. And two, how about this phrase by Jim Rohn? I will take care of me for you if you will take care of you for me. Imparting information despite words. I love the work of Jody Moore, life coach. I've presented a similar model to hers in some of my other Love Zone marriage classes, so the concept may be familiar. Her model goes as follows. We have C, T, F, A, R. C is for circumstance, T is for thoughts, F is for feeling, A is for action, and R is for result. And the result always is because of our thoughts. The circumstance is factual, without opinion. This part is out of your control. Our circumstances can be proven in a court of law. Everybody would agree on it. Our circumstances trigger thoughts. You will have many thoughts. So here you pick one you want to examine, only one. Then our thoughts create our feelings. What is the feeling this thought gives you? A one-word description. Sad, anxious, confused. Our feelings fuel our actions. What do you do or not do in a situation when you feel this way? Our actions create our results. This is the result of your actions and proof for the thought. Anytime you want to feel better or achieve a new result, you can use the model to take a look at what's going on and then be deliberate about what you choose to think, to change your model. It's kind of like magic, Jody says. Though I love this model and have trained my brain to see things differently if I choose, let me point out the missing piece in communication for our purposes here. Separating the circumstance from the thought from the feeling leaves out the important part of communicating to impart information despite words. We may have the circumstance of someone saying, "It's a lovely day," but the way that they actually deliver it may be different than what they are actually saying. Maybe you can't prove the way that they're delivering it in a court of law. Albert Mehrabian, a researcher of body language, found that communication is 55% nonverbal, 38% vocal, and 7% words only. 7% of our communication happens through actual words. So in looking at Jody Moore's model, someone may be folding their arms, furrowing their brows, tapping their foot, and in a gruff voice pronounce, "It's a lovely day." In her model, we completely ignore the furrowed brows, the tapping foot, and the gruff voice, despite the declaration of the lovely day. Maybe it's raining, and the person hates rain. Or maybe there's another context the person is referring to for the listener to catch the sarcasm. So I think we must take the actions and feelings into account the other person may be emitting. This makes for good empathy to catch what is being said despite words. As I like to say, the most advanced mode of communication is through thoughts without speaking, our hearts without thinking, our body without efforting, and truth despite the evidence around us. You often hear people say, "Don't be a mind reader." But I think when they say to not be a mind reader, they're saying that we shouldn't be thinking how they would think. We shouldn't assume that someone else is going to think how I assume. What I do think that we could do as far as mind reading is read the frequency from what they emit despite the words, like a radio frequency or a Wi-Fi signal that is all around us, but you must plug into it in order to access it and reap the benefit. We should not get caught in the frequency they emit and mistakenly read it as our own. If you are especially empathic, whether or not you realize it, you can take on their stuff and emotions become exponentiated. You can create your own conclusions staying true. And you can pay attention to your and their spirit. Remember, this is the fourth I we spoke of at the first, inspiration, spirit. Always be on the lookout for truth, despite what is being said. As stated earlier, 37% of communication is vocal despite words. Grunts. Uh-huh. And silence. An example. There's a local shop owner that has a funny habit. When you are talking to him, often he will make a low, rough sound, which I have come to realize means he has something he really wants to say, but he'll wait until you're done saying it. Barely. It sounds like this. I say, "I heard this product will work wonders for you." Halfway through my statement, I hear, until the shop owner then supplies, "Yeah, studies have shown, blah, 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 blah." Have you thought about how you might use nonverbal sounds in your communication? I spoke in Love Zone Marriage 4 course about emotions and micro-expressions. Researcher Paul Ekman found 6 particular micro-expressions that are very brief, involuntary facial expressions humans make when experiencing an emotion. They usually last 0.5 seconds and cannot be faked. These 6 basic micro-expressions are fear, anger, disgust, happiness, sadness, and surprise. No words can hide the first involuntary expression. Think about it. You know as a parent when your child is lying because of the first expression that flashes across their face, or what your teen child really thought of the date when they return home and you ask them how it went. And then on the other side, what do you mean to communicate? What inside you needs to change so that your own microexpressions will manifest in a way that benefits you instead of showing true colors you may not be proud of? And how about posture? What does a posture say about somebody? And what posture do you want to represent who you will be as confident, compassionate, and true? The Go-Clay method for a pain-free life says a proper posture has the hips and shoulders back, as opposed to our slouchy modern postures. This posture portrays you as someone of power. Take a look at social researcher Amy Cuddy's power pose. She looks like Wonder Woman. Her hands to her side, her feet out. If you've ever needed to feel powerful, this is a wonderful pose to try. Karen Hewitt says, "Fake it till you become it." We all know that our body language affects how people see us, but does it also shape how we see ourselves? In her TED Talk, "Your Body Language Shapes Who You Are," Amy Cuddy discusses how our posture can affect testosterone and cortisol levels in the brain and change our feelings about ourselves. That means that standing tall and proud, even when we don't feel confident, can have a positive impact on how we're perceived. Remember communication outside of words in your relationships and especially in your marriage. What is being imparted? So I'd like to invite you to answer these questions that I covered throughout this section. What vocal, no words communication are you imparting, and what does it mean? What are your micro-expressions saying about you, and do you want them to stay that way? Remember, they're involuntary. And lastly, what posture do you want to represent who you will be as confident, compassionate, and true? You can find out more about the various parts and points of body language and what they mean in the extra bonus section at the end of Love Zone Marriage 8, Couples Languages. Communicating styles. I used to think if I loved someone, I would do anything for them. You know, everything I do it for you. So when my husband wanted to communicate when I wasn't at my best, I would do it anyway. I found after 10:30 p.m., our conversation would always end bad. I was crabby. Or in the middle of caring for a small child or cooking dinner. Not going to be as present as he wants me to be, try as I might. But then I found, even when I'm at my best, if it's not a pleasant experience for me, I'm going to be always unavailable. Or giving a child a bath, which doesn't make for good communication either. Through the years of understanding myself, I now know to express my needs in communication, fill myself up enough to have something to give in communication, and how to renegotiate old paradigms of communication, or bust. I came to realize I am loving myself enough to not put myself in a bad place of communication. Now, it's not always the ideal. Sometimes you just have to communicate even when the house is flooding. So let's look at the love zone balance. We know from the first great commandment in the Bible that we should love God first and most with all our heart, might, mind, and strength. And then we are to love our neighbor as ourself. And as I see it, the closest neighbor we have is our spouse. So we need to love our spouse as ourself. As we love ourselves and to the degree that we love ourselves. So if I am open to communicating whenever, because to me that shows love, I am not loving myself because I am not at my best. If I am kind to myself and do what I need to in order to communicate well, I am going to then communicate well with both my spouse and myself with God first. This is the love zone balance. So if you are tired or burnt out, communication will be hard because it requires investment. If you are loving yourself, you know how communication has to work for you too, and you must be in tune to know how to love yourself and communicate best. This is why the first 4 I's were spoken of at the first of this course, and why they're so important. Withholding love is burdensome, as it's our natural state. Withholding communication is withholding love because love is attention freely given, which wholeheartedly includes communication. If we love ourselves, we find a way to communicate to show love to everyone involved, ourselves included. We communicate with our loving God through prayer and reaching to heaven and spirituality, and then we love our spouse as ourselves. Take a look here how our tendency to open or close with our spouse affects our communication. We have these 4 doors, open and closed. We're going to say that closed is the withdrawer, signified by the letter W, and open is the pursuer, signified by the letter P. So we have closed to closed, the withdrawer to the withdrawer. Open, pursuer, to closed, the withdrawer. Then our next set of doors is closed, or the withdrawer, to open, which is the pursuer. And then finally, both doors are open, the open to open, pursuer to pursuer. The closed to closed is a good way of seeing how they are being avoiders. So marriage is good when we avoid conflict and each other, which brings stuckedness. If you have open to closed, this is a pursuer condition where the withdrawer is going to say, they need to give me space. The closed to open, we're going to say, is the withdrawer, and the withdrawer tries. They are more invested, but they're ambivalent. They try, they retreat, they're confusing. So the avoiders are just kind of standoffish, and the withdrawers, they will draw towards the pursuer and then retreat. Then we have the open to open, which is the ideal, the secure relationship. So in regards to the open and closed, I often hear this complaint. Whenever I come to my spouse needing something, they just shut down and dissociate. They really don't love me. If your spouse seems to shut down and pull away in communication, it's likely not because they don't love you, it's likely because they love you. And it's their style to create space to communicate better. Let everything cool down, not be flooded. Or the opposite. I feel smothered. They won't let me be. I need to have some space. This is from the withdrawer or the avoider concerning the pursuer who won't let them be. The avoiders won't be complaining too loudly externally, but they will likely have a host of internal conditions, emotionally, physically, and mentally. When push comes to shove, a closed communicator will eventually turn, if they are interested in staying invested in the relationship, and may surprise you with the energy they now put forth to express themselves. You may see this in a marriage of 30 years when suddenly, with no indication of discontent, a spouse says they are done and files for divorce. They've been closed until something activates a need with them they are no longer willing to deal with going without. Maybe it's having lost themselves and needing to reclaim self, or that the children are out of the house and they no longer are willing to invest. I think that Brett R. Williams puts it really well in his book, You Can Be Right or You Can Be Married, The Cycle of Love and Hurt. The people we love hurt us. When we are hurt by the people we love, we feel unloved. When we feel unloved, we withdraw our love. When they feel our withdrawal, they feel hurt and unloved, and in turn withdraw too. When they withdraw love, we again feel hurt and unloved, and we retreat further. And then the cycle continues, and then the people we love continue to hurt us, and we continue to hurt them. What is the answer to the open and closed communication types? First, be aware that certain people are the way they are, from the strong and silent man to the fun-loving woman, or the strong and silent woman and the fun-loving guy, who attract each other's opposite, then are annoyed by those opposites later. But we just learn to love them anyway. Which has a lot to do with personalities we discuss in Love Zone Marriage 6 course. Second, understand that there may be many types of interloper conditions that stunt or exaggerate communication willingness. Let's next briefly cover communication styles in our deliveries. We begin with passive-submissive, which we are going to call the withdrawer. Then we have passive-aggressive. And then we have aggressive, which we will call the pursuer. And then we will have assertive, which is our secure communication style. The passive-submissive person is emotionally dishonest. They are indirect, they are inhibited, blaming, apologetic, and they are self-denying. They allow others to step on them. The passive-aggressive person is emotionally dishonest, indirect, self-denying at first, and then they're fed later through their quiet tactics. And then they are self-enhancing at the expense of others later. The aggressive communicator or the pursuer is inappropriately honest, in your face. They are direct. They are attacking, blaming, controlling. They are willing to step on you. And they are self-enhancing at the expense of others. And then we have the ideal, the assertive. I used to have a boss when I was 15 years old. I worked at a pharmacy, and the boss would always say to me, "Be more assertive," as he punched his fist into the air. I didn't really totally know what he was talking about. But the assertive person is appropriately honest, direct, self-confident and expressive, and self-enhancing, empathetic to emotions of all involved. So having looked at this chart, which would you say you communicate most from? Sometimes we have no idea what we are doing until we stop and look at it and realize how we're being undermining or one up or however it may be. And when we learn to be assertive and work from our own personal power, the whole game of communication becomes different. There are 2 indicators of good communication. So first, this is disclosure. What, when, where, why, and how I am willing to share. And then second is perceived partner responsiveness. And as Susan Johnson, marriage researcher and expert, says, means, are you there for me? We're married. Are you there for me? At its heart of communication is the acronym H.E.A.R.T. This came from the Center for Thriving website. First, H, hear. Know your spouse by reflecting the essence of what they said. E, empathize. Imagine what it is like to really feel what they are feeling. But, caution, don't get caught in it. If so, practice not feeling from them and really cluing into what is yours. A is for appreciate. Find things about them to be grateful. What is their strength here in what they communicate? R in heart is relax into your heart while listening. Take some deep breaths. Let it become a less triggering event for you. And T, togetherness. Come from a spirit of teamwork. In the end, honest, open communication still can't bring each other happiness. Jody Moore, life coach and my mentor, asks, do you think you can change enough to override your husband's brain software that you should be able to make him happy? Well, don't. Don't change for him. Change for you, and you remain for him candid, compassionate, and curious. If you're tired of feeling defensive and frustrated, you can instead be true and honest. You might say, this may be awkward, husband, but I'm going to be more honest with you. The truth from an open place is powerful. Whether he wants to stay married to you or not is up to him. But if you are honest and true, whatever happens in your open, honest communication is going to be right. So think about this. Ask yourself, when do I feel it's okay to open up with my spouse or not? Also, ask yourself, what is the difference between my feeling open or closed in our communication? And why? Then share this with your spouse. Sharing these thoughts can be as easy as saying, I want to try something different in our communication. I want to be more open. Are you in a good place to listen? If this is too hard, send an email or text to open the gate to communicate. Yes, it's not as personal, but it gets the ball rolling if you are stuck. Like Winona Judd sings, love can build a bridge between your heart and mind. Don't you think it's time? And like the master bridge builder, Jesus Christ says, if thou art careful and troubled about many things, choose the good part. With heart in mind, let's continue on to communicating tools. Communicating tools. Before we dive into the words we speak in communication through the AEIOU model, we must understand a few things at play first. Let's consider emotions before we speak. According to Susan Johnson, creator of the Emotional Freedom Technique, or EFT, our emotions can drag us down before we've even said a word. We begin with our needs. We need to be known, accepted, seen, cared for, valued, comforted, respected, and knowing that they are going to give us the attention that we need. When this doesn't happen, then we have our hidden emotions that disconnect us. We start to feel sad, lonely, shameful, inadequate, hurt, and afraid. Then from there we get our visible emotions coming out, which might look like rejection, resentment, contempt, anger, blame, frustration, apathy, and overwhelm. And then the interpretation of those things creates a negative view of me and or of my spouse. And then the coping mechanism is to defend, attack, protest, shut down, and placate. So it's a downward escalation that happens when we're not able to have our needs considered. So what to do? Well, Susan Johnson says, in the moment, take a breath, slow down, touch. Then, request, help me understand. Reassure, I'm listening. And reflect back what they said. And then repeat that as needed. You'll see these ideas as we progress in this section. One of the most important keys I've learned in communicating is using I statements. Using I instead of you is more than not pointing an accusatory finger. It's about really owning your stuff, maintaining personal power that says you know who and what you are, and you are above being pushed around emotionally. It's about agency and being true to yourself. Look at how much changes between these two statements. You make me so angry. 2. I get so upset when I perceive that maybe I have been taken advantage of, or whatever. It takes the blame off the other person and creates openness. The first thing a therapist will tell you when you go in for marriage repair is about the 4 horsemen and their antidotes. These are the ways we act and react. The first horseman is criticism, verbally attacking personality or character. And the antidote, the gentle startup. Use I statements, expressing feelings, plus a positive need. The second horseman, contempt, attacking sense of self with an intent to insult or abuse. And the antidote, build a culture of appreciation. Remind yourself of your partner's positive qualities and find gratitude for positive actions. Third horseman, defensiveness, victimizing yourself to ward off a perceived attack and reverse the blame. And the antidote, take responsibility, accept your partner's perspective, and offer an apology for any wrongdoing. And then stonewalling. This is your withdraw, closed doors scenario. Withdrawing to avoid conflict and convey disapproval, distance, and separation. And the antidote, physiological self-soothing. Take a break and spend that time doing something soothing and distracting. Let's talk about conflict versus contention. In my first few decades of marriage, I used the terms conflict and contention synonymously. It was bad to have either, and you avoid conflict or contention at all costs. A dear mentor pointed out to me that conflict and contention are not at all the same. Conflict is a difference of opinion, a disagreement, and this happens among the best of us, all with a similar goal, a desired result that works in their own best interest. Think of the head of a company who leads a panel of professionals who all try to solve a conflict. Collaboration may be the answer to that conflict. With contention, struggle, strife, and rivalry leads. It's more personally attacking than mere conflict. In that business setting with the professionals, this may end in drinks thrown across the board table at one another and people stalking away in a huff. Contention. Some people will say there's no room in marriage for either conflict or contention, but I would say if someone loves themselves enough to be cared about by others, they need the others to know where they differ or care. And that doesn't mean there will always be conflict, but it's important to share what is real for one another in a marriage. And we definitely don't need to lower ourselves to contention, where we are personally attacking. I hear others say, let's just agree to disagree. But to me, agreeing to disagree is being disagreeable. At its heart is a shunning, an unwillingness to consider your viewpoint. With empathy, we want to understand what they are thinking, to see how to empathize with someone like Hitler, so to speak, and then receive the same for us, the empathy. How about your level of control in communication? We mentioned in section 2 about owning our stuff. So we can, 1, express ourselves about that which we have control over. Like the serenity prayer. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And then 2, to let go of things not in your control that create a victim mindset and place blame on the other. Taking control where it isn't yours doesn't bring you together. One way that I like to ease that feeling of wanting to be in control is a simple statement. You may be right. I'm not saying they are right. I acknowledge the possibility I may be wrong. I keep my opinion, maybe what I consider fact, as an option. I leave it open-ended so everyone remains respected. Other problems with communication. Gaslighting. One spouse telling the other that they are wrong, when the spouse has every reason to believe they were right. The effects of trauma. Being triggered in communication. If you say what you really want to say, they might leave you or abuse you in some way. Emotions are so escalated from being a withdrawer that sharing won't be pretty, so you continue to avoid so you don't explode like the volcano. Each of these problems and more can be solved through self-compassion, boundaries, practice, outside support, even mediation or therapy if needed, and practicing all sorts of love, the love zone marriage, and not tolerating verbal abuse once you recognize it for what it is. I read in the book Crucial Conversations by Carrie Patterson and Joseph Grenny about various forms of communication, and I want to share with you lesson number 1, they call it, stick to your goals so you don't get overly emotional. What is your goal in your communication? Is it to say you want more connection with them, but now you're talking on and on about the details of what your spouse does instead of time with you? Crucial Conversations is a great book, but I am sticking with that one lesson, and that is, what is the goal? Are you sticking to the goal? I love the real love philosophy introduced to me by Greg Bear, and it is composed of 4 points. First of all, we need to be able to tell our spouse the truth so that we can then be truly seen, so that we can be understood and eventually loved. A very easy formula. And now, I want to introduce to you the model that I learned from Brett R. Williams called AEIOU communication. We used this in our marriage for a while as we were trying to not stomp all over each other as we were communicating. So the A is, ask if this is a good time to talk. Am I giving a child a bath? Is it 10:30 at night? A person who loves themselves can say no if it is not a good time to talk. E. Express and explain your thoughts or feelings in a calm and truthful way. I. Use the word I am feeling, however it is you're truly feeling. Remember, we're not going to be accusatory pointing the finger. We are sticking with our own feelings. And likely this is going to be a soft emotion. This is something that's not the harder, harsher things that we might go to otherwise. O in AEIO, the other isn't at fault, to be blamed or accused. This is about the speaker. The listener only listens. U, understanding of what was given through the eyes of the listener. If the listener doesn't get it, clarify, then go deeper. The listener has a chance to speak after the AEIOU communication has happened, but only an hour after. So there's no immediate rebuttal. None of this, but this is the way that I'm thinking, and then emotions start to escalate. None of this conversation is attacking. It's done with love. And you can even arrange for the next time. Hey, it's your turn tomorrow. or tonight for the AEIOU communication. I learned 2 tips for communicating from The Ridiculous Happy Wife, whose concept is from Laura Doyle. First of all, here's the statement that you can give to a spouse if you just really want to get something. Instead of using the negative approach of, "You never do this thing for me," or "Why am I always the one that has to do this thing for me?" Instead, you say, quote, "I would love to have," fill in the blank, with the final outcome. Or, "I would love it if you would," fill in the blank. "Give me a foot rub. Surprise me with a date. Tell me you love me." Do not mention what you don't want. Then let go of the expectation. If they actually do give you a foot rub, great. We are not concentrating on the negative. You receive what he gives you not with him as the errand boy, but as the hero. My job is to attract more love. Love attracts love. Things will get as good as you can stand. So what can you stand? And if not, why not? Second tip suggested by Laura Doyle. She has several, but I'm taking these 2 from her work. She uses the phrase of the wife to the husband, "Whatever you think." This is when it really should be in his ball court, like what he should wear, or what he should take to a work lunch, or something that really is in his control. This is relinquishing power where you shouldn't have it. It feels good to think that you know the answer for them, and then they become dependent on you, and then you become annoyed that they can't do anything for themselves. But if you can learn how to use the phrase, "whatever you think," for things in their power, then you will have someone who begins to adore you. This is not a relinquishing of control. It is avoiding taking control where it's not yours by allowing your spouse to choose, to serve you, and to be there for himself. I liked those ideas and have tried it in my own marriage and find that there is some definite truth for it. So remember, this is part of the collaboration we're speaking of from section 3, where we are both known and being known. We are curious, we are not settling, and we're going to find fulfillment in the middle ground. So here is my challenge to you. Have an AEIOU conversation with your spouse. So this is going to mean one of you comes to your spouse and says, "Hey, is this a good time to talk?" And maybe show them the outline first so that they can know they're not going to rebut after everything you say, so that you have a chance to be able to get out what you're going to speak. They can rephrase whatever you said, and you can clarify until they are fully understanding what is being communicated. And then give them their turn. You can advance this conversation eventually to where you are having a spirit of love no matter who is speaking. Guilt and shame in communication. Janine Antoni is a different kind of performance artist. Usually, we enter an art gallery and enjoy pictorial or 3D art as we browse from room to room. But here's what Antoni did. In 1993, she set a 600-pound cube of lard and a 600-pound cube of chocolate in a room of the art gallery, and at night she would come and, get this, chew off pieces of the lard to eventually be fashioned into lipstick, and chew off pieces of the chocolate to be spit out, dang it, and melted into chocolate hearts. The next day, viewers would see a reformed piece of art, never the same as the day before. She called the artwork GNAW, G-N-A-W. When my adult son told me about this artist, I laughed out loud. Who would even think to carry out such artwork? And what was she trying to convey? My son mentioned he detected shame in this artwork, that women could be ashamed for the substance that makes unnecessary makeup, and shame for what women may binge on, the chocolate, only indulged in at night in the dark, as she relocated herself during the day to not divulge the amount of chocolate she chewed up, but sadly didn't actually eat. I think about my guilt when I secretly indulge from my chocolate stash. Oops, it's out to the world now. And the shame that can result from all that trying to push away what you really don't want to acknowledge by yourself. A chocolate addict. So how does guilt and shame relate to communication? it can actually be a big piece. If my husband approaches me and says, "I saw you eat that salad the other day," I'm not going to think, "Oh no, now he knows how hopeless I am. I might as well throw in the towel now, become an out-of-control bulimic salad eater." But if he says, "I found your stash of chocolate in the closet," I might become embarrassed and defensive and shut down, and find ways to hide my chocolate better. The things we hide behind that we engage in when no one else is around, like Janine and Tony chewing and spitting out chocolate at night, can become our identity we hopelessly try to reject. If my husband approaches and says, "By the way, you know our closet," my first reaction will be defense, when maybe he was just going to mention how we could arrange the shoes differently. Hence, a lifetime of past history, upbringing, education, experiences, genetics, and relationships become wedged in our innocent, and maybe not so innocent, communication. And then we jump into repeated cycles that become worse than an old rerun, perpetuating our guilt and shame over and over. And our innocent spouse takes the brunt of that guilt and shame. I've heard many definitions of guilt and shame, so let's clarify how I will use it here. Guilt is, I did something wrong, and shame is, I am something wrong. My first few times of hiding chocolate would fall into the category of guilt. I hid the chocolate and ate it secretly, and I shouldn't have. But when I've hid it so long and so often, it then becomes shame that I have internalized as my identity of chocolate abuser. My core beliefs then revolve around that shame. And our marital communication cycles also malignantly and covertly weave themselves into the fabric of that shame. So then when my husband informs me he found the chocolate in the closet, all of a sudden I take an instance he may not even know about when I dealt with my children in a way I'm not particularly proud, and I am also a terrible mom now. But depending on my open or closed communication style, I may fight back to defend my parenting, or shove it inside to also be a source of shame. And suddenly, my chocolate addiction affects my parenting. In the end of that communication event with my spouse, we have then tapped into subconscious shame that results in us being miles away from where we began. This is why I mentioned in a previous section that we need to keep our goal in mind, that my husband initially thought we could find a better place for the shoes in the closet. This is also why we must learn to be honest with our emotions. If I came to my spouse and said, "Guess what? You married a chocolate abuser." Well, first, he'd be a little confused, but my experience has been that when I explain the soft emotion, I give and give to the family all day, and I just like something that is my very own that I don't have to share. Then he is much more compassionate and connecting with me, and we don't have to even dip into the other shame pieces. And we learn to be more understanding one with another, and learn and know one another enough that if he happens upon me in the closet binging on my chocolate, he knows later to offer other forms of compassion to me, and let me fight my own demons without his judgments or expectations. Stan Tatkin, author of Wired for Love, teaches that of paramount importance in marriage is that the couple has the owner's manual to their spouse, not because they were given it to them by their spouse, but because they learned it. Now let's say I was really engaging in something in that closet that was in no one's best interest. Maybe I'm part of the chocolate mafia, aiding and abetting criminals, and I was draining our bank accounts to support my habit, and the kids were suffering for it. Then I would have to become serious about making things right outside and inside of me. In the Negotiation and Conflict Management Journal, researchers outlined a specific 6-step process for apologizing. 1. Expression of regret. 2. Explanation of what went wrong. 3. Acknowledgement of responsibility. 4. Declaration of repentance. 5. Offer of repair. And 6. Request for forgiveness. Side note, if you are continually apologizing, what's going on inside that you feel you need the attention you receive from issuing an apology? Or apology after apology? Or if you are the only one ever apologizing, how does self-love and the love zone balance of loving spouse as self play into this? After I have done the repair work of accounting for my wrong actions outside of me, there would still be a pull to internally berate myself for what a bad person I am. Shame. You may even feel shame in the way you communicate. Can't even get that part right.
Well, I came upon acceptance commitment therapy, ACT. We start with acceptance. You open up to the fact. I see I am eating chocolate in the closet, and that is all that matters in this moment. It sure is good, and it got there somehow. 2. Mindfulness. This redefines thinking and experiencing as an ongoing behavioral process, not an outcome. Right now, I am eating chocolate, and that is all the description I assign to it. 3. Diffusing. This is where you reduce the charge of the action. Be simply willing to do something different, or not, to distance myself from the act. I could not eat the chocolate, or I could totally eat it. Do I even want to worry about tomorrow and chocolate? 4. Self as context. You are not your experience. Even as I eat chocolate, I myself am not defined as a chocolate eater. That's irrelevant. 5. Valuing choice. This is where you set behavioral tasks linked to determined values that create meaning. I value feeling adequately full with something tasty. I don't value feeling overstuffed and selfish. I can do chocolate differently. And 6. Committed action. Do something new based on values and the meaning I want to create. I can still eat chocolate secretly, but moderately. In ACT Made Simple by Russ Harris, he talks about the ACT triflex. On the top point of this triangle, we have be present. This is contact with the present moment and self as context. We move around to the next point. Do what matters. This is committed action and values. We go around to the next point. Open up. This is acceptance and diffusion. And then we return to be present with contact with the present moment and the self as context. He labels this triflex triangle with psychological flexibility, which we lose in shame. I am satisfied that I have decided chocolate's place in my life. I have found an amount of the food of the gods that satisfies me before I feel uncomfortably full, and I am able to share the goods with others when I want, if I want to. When you deal with your stuff, or at least see how it affects you in your marriage, you are able to bypass your stuff in communication and stick with your intended goal for the desired outcome. So I'd like you to do this activity. Try acceptance commitment therapy, ACT, with something in your life that may have you experiencing shame. 1. Acceptance. 2. Mindfulness. 3. Diffusing. 4. Self as context. 5. Valuing choice. And 6. Committed action. You can find out more information about ACT online if you're interested. Notice if you see your communication in marriage opening up.
Energy flows where attention goes, says Tony Robbins. If you are concentrating on being right or vindicated, being heard but not listening, building yourself up against your spouse, revenge, retribution, you won't meet the ultimate goal of communicating, to foster love. Let's talk about a few tips of good communication. 1. Acknowledge your spouse when they are doing something right. 2. Offer specific feedback on how to best love you, devoid of expectation. 3. Honor your spouse in front of the children and other people. 4. Brag about your spouse to other people, but don't put others down like, he's the smartest man in the room. 5. Communicate when you'll be late or have a change that affects them. 6. Look into their eyes when they're talking to you. Put away your device. 7. Give a creative expression of love. Issue tender words, spoken or written. One time my husband said to me, "When I see you, I see my eternity." Oh, yes, I love that. 8. Make your interactions a mostly favorable experience. Consider the magic 5-to-1 ratio good to bad. I go into more detail about the magic ratio in Love Zone Marriage Course 8. 9. Resupply your energy, physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, to communicate well. Recovering yourself may mean ideal communication takes a back seat, but communicate to your spouse your need for recovery and patience on his part. 10. Live in the present. Release the damaging past or the unrealistic expectations of the future. The meditation in the conclusion of this course will address this more. 11. Don't attempt to solve problems, but to see and be seen, unless they ask for help. If you haven't seen this short video yet, it's a must on communicating with compassion and empathy, not to solve another's problem. It's called It's Not About the Nail. Search it up on YouTube. Some say love is spelled T-I-M-E, time. So let's talk about time together. Set aside a time to be together to appreciate and love each other, no problems included. We already have enough problems in the world. Make this a sanctioned, pleasant, and fun time for you both. Leave it all behind. Time together will happen if you plan your regular togetherness and stick to it. Here are some examples of daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, and occasionally ways that you can spend time together. Daily, dinner together. 20-minute touching base time. Foot rubs. Switch nights. He does one night, she does the next. He does the next night, she does the next. Weekly. Have a weekly date, gospel study, going out to lunch, sex, couple counsel, which I will talk about soon. Monthly. A surprise. Switch time taking turns with the surprise. Enjoy a sunset on the deck. Yearly. An activity or hobby you both love. Spelunking or snorkeling, humanitarian service, canoeing, go to a play. Occasionally. Something that is more of a splurge, like a resort, a big concert, whitewater rafting. So I'd like to give you a challenge. This is called the couple counsel that I encourage you to incorporate into your life. This is something that you do at the same time and same day, and you follow these 5 prompts. So let's say it's Sunday night, and you're going to take 15 or so minutes to cover these topics. So the 5 topics are: 1. Appreciation. Express gratitude, which is a super high energy emotion. A conversation began in thankfulness sets an inviting tone. Give specific compliments and gratitude. Something I appreciated about you this week was... The second thing, plans. Discuss the outlook for together, alone, and family time. What will we look forward to together? Examples: a concert, a getaway, a hike, dinner at a special place. Ask, what's going on this week? When will we make quality time together? The next thing to talk about, finances. Tackle one of the biggest rocks in the happy marriage path, money disagreement. Take time to talk about how your accounts, spending, and projections look. Remember to allow money for frivolous fun and freedom. Separate bank accounts are great. This might look like, according to the last bank statement, or our budget is, or how shall we spend money this year? The fourth subject, improvements. Identify one way you would enjoy marriage more. This isn't a request, just a knowing piece. Express what you want more of, not what you're not getting enough of. Of course, take turns here. What I would like is a 20-minute connecting time in the evening. And the fifth point, goals. Focus on a common purpose and know individual dreams as an opportunity to support each other. You might ask, what are your goals and how can I help? What kind of goals can we put together? This weekly discussion doesn't need to be long, but when you do it regularly, you don't have to spread it out randomly, especially if one of you doesn't appreciate always having to be available and interrupted. Again, love yourself as your spouse if this is not your style. You avoid last-minute quick decisions. You remember more clearly your combined defined goals. And as a side note, these 5 discussion points can easily incorporate any of Gary Chapman's 5 love languages: quality time, words of affirmation, gifts of love, physical touch, and acts of service. I mentioned earlier that my husband agreed to cook on the weekends. Hooray! As we have both become aware of and communicated what we do and don't like about kitchen work, Here is how our cooking experience often plays out now. Here is us making fish and chips. I buy the ingredients for the meal. He will chop, grate, zest, and mince as the kitchen fills with heavenly smells. I will often prepare a side vegetable while he deals with the beastie air fryer fries. I understand he will be more all over the kitchen, and I help to clean up as we go. I abhor cleaning the garlic press, so he does it before it has a chance to harden up in the holes. Though he grills his self-Alaskan caught fish in a special fish grilling basket, no one likes to clean the baked-on implement, but I'm okay to soak and scrub and clean it later. I place a tablecloth on the table with flowers in the middle. Of course, the most important part of the meal, except the chocolate at the end. I will transport the glass water pitcher to the table and enlist the kids' help in setting the table. I call all the kids to dinner and we stop for grace, then dig in. I walk around the table and kiss my husband's cheek. He's got grease on his lips, and tell him, "I'm so glad you made dinner. I enjoyed it so much." We all help clean up the table. Most of this used to be all my job, but having let myself be known by communicating preferences, time in the kitchen is so much more enjoyable for everybody. Now, think back to your repeating, looping cycle from the introduction of this course. What you say, I take it to mean. What I say, you take it to mean. Back to what you say, I take it to mean, and so forth. How can you see this cycle differently now? The 4 I's in how you communicate best with yourself, especially concentrating on intuition and inspiration, as that alone will transform communication outside yourself. 10 points of good communication, from being open, honest, assertive, owning your stuff in greater emotional maturity, remembering self-care to be at your best, to allowing the response gap, perspectives, collaboration, the impact of imparting information without words, using balanced empathy, working through conflict, guilt and shame, spending quality time, seeking to build true connection and peace. Can you see the pause from what you say, I take it to mean, and be able to interrupt it, stopping it from looping out of control, stopping the back and forth in its track, to keep your things as yours as you simply seek to communicate truth and compassion? Jennifer Finlayson-Fife, marriage therapist, tells us that communication is all about emotional regulation. So keep things on your side of the line and send your cycle looping for love. Good communication builds a relationship of compassion, connection, peace, and dignity, while loving self as your spouse, with loving God first and most, the love zone balance. Enjoy the concluding meditation, spiritual recapture, and I wish you the very best in your communication journey as you find and foster true love. Spiritual recapture meditation. Find a place where you can sit or lay comfortably, where you won't fall asleep. A place where you won't be disturbed. Loosen your clothing if needed. Begin to find a place of relaxation, of deep relaxation. Relax your head. Relax your eyes and your neck and your tongue. Relax your shoulders and allow your lungs to fill deeply in and out. Relax your elbows, your wrists, and your fingertips. Relax your stomach area and your hips. Relax the back of your knees and your ankles and your toes. Take a deep breath in and a releasing breath out. When a thought surfaces, as it will, notice it like on a movie screen and let it move on to the left, to the past. Go even deeper, allowing the mind to be still, to become spacious and level. Like water spreading to the edges and filling in the cracks. Calm, still water, going where it will. You are opening the spirit space to reign over the mind space and the body space. Determine the thing bothering you most in your mind right now in your relationship. The Spirit is ultimately in charge and knows perfectly how the mind and body operate when fully functional. You must become aware of the preeminence, the superiority of your spirit. Ask the inner mind to manage and deal with any pain, sadness, anger, fear, guilt, shame, or loneliness, using whatever support system is needed. Hand it over to Jesus Christ or to a special guardian, a part of nature, or sub-identity of yourself that guides you, that cushions you where needed. This relinquishing to a power greater than your own cleanses your spirit, opening a space to renew. Acknowledge what now may be a bitter sweetness, whatever the thing you need to bring to peace, served you in some way. The person or people involved were crucial to your evolvement, to your progression, to your spirit alignment. Forgive anyone involved, your spouse, and especially yourself. Repentance and forgiveness is a spiritual detox, and the Spirit holds the perfect pattern of wellness that can be accessed free of darkness we tend to bury within. So welcome in the light, and free your spouse, yourself, and anyone else from the burden of the past. We are all doing the best we can. Remember to continue to relax and breathe. Focus in on your heart. Your heart wants what is best for you. When heart and spirit align, truth is the outcome. What is your heart and spirit agreeing upon? Take that thing in your heart. Hold it in your two hands in your mind's eye. Notice it. Look at it from all angles. Hear it. Feel it. Replace any darkness you might notice in that thing with the light. And feel the overwhelming power of the good, so that the good, the light, becomes the new future pattern, program, the new response. Now take that thing, now purified, in both hands, and bring it back into your heart, glorified. Since the spirit is in line, the mind and heart are aligned. The soul is buoyed up. Take a deep, cleansing breath. Jesus Christ sets the example of overcoming the world, and we follow his overcoming example. So, allow restoration to flow and renewal to wash over you. This overcoming, restoration, and renewal is a recapturing of the wholeness of your spiritual DNA. Seal the experience with thanks for blessings and knowledge gained in this experience, with this person or people. The high energy gratitude emotion ensures weak things become strong. Be grateful for your spouse, anyone involved, for the role they play in succoring your spirit, in bringing you to light and alignment with truth. We are children of God, receiving light, continuing in God, and receiving more light are what we are created to do. From the very beginning, we followed the light. We followed our Heavenly Father and His plan. Seeking the light is in our spiritual DNA. Take a deep, refilling breath. When you are ready, become aware of the present moment. Notice the refreshment you feel in your heart, in your mind, and in your body. Let your spirit continue to be filled with light as long as you can manage. If needed, come back and do this meditation again, daily if needed. God wants you to be happy, and you can be when spirits are in alignment. Strengthening your spirit helps all relationships.